Hi, I'm Eleanor. My children wanted to sell my house the moment my father passed away. No discussion, no hesitation. Just get rid of it and move on. At first, I was heartbroken by their eagerness to erase our family home. But then I discovered what Grandpa had hidden in the attic all these years. What looked like worthless old junk was actually the key to a secret he'd kept buried for over 60 years. A secret that would change not just our family's history, but history itself. The K. Morning after the funeral, my son Mark stood in the kitchen, scrolling through real estate listings on his phone. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Mom, you can't maintain this place on your own, he said, not even looking up at me. The market's hot right now. We could get you into a nice little condo. Low maintenance. My daughter Caroline nodded from across the room. He's right, Mom. This place is practically falling apart anyway. She gestured toward the ceiling where a water stain had been spreading for years. Besides, wouldn't it be nice to have a little nest egg? Dad's medical bills ate through most of your savings. I stared at them. These adults who had once been children running through these halls, who had built pillow forts in the living room and celebrated Christmas mornings under that high ceiling. How quickly they wanted to package it all away, reduce 6 decades of life to a nice little condo. Your grandfather built this house, I said quietly. He left it to me specifically. Mark sighed, finally looking up from his phone. Mom, Grandpa died at 96. He was from a different era. He didn't understand today's housing market or the cost of upkeep. He wouldn't want you struggling. I didn't bother arguing that I wasn't struggling. Not really. Frugal, yes. Careful with. Money, absolutely. But I'd managed this house on my own for 8 years since my husband passed, and I'd keep managing it now that Dad was gone too. Just think about it, Caroline said, squeezing my shoulder. We only want what's best for you. What they meant was, we've already decided what's best. After they left, I stood in the empty kitchen, listening to the silence. The house felt different now. Dad had lived with me these past 5 years after Mom died. His presence had filled the empty spaces my husband left behind. Now there was just me, rattling around in rooms built for a family. For a moment, I considered calling Mark back, telling him to go ahead with the listings. Maybe they were right. Maybe it was time to let go. But something pulled me upstairs instead. Dad's room was at the end of the hall, still untouched, still smelling faintly of his Old Spice aftershave and the peppermints he always kept in his pocket. I sat on his bed, running my hand over the worn quilt Mom had made decades ago. What should I do, Dad? I whispered to the empty room. My eyes drifted to the ceiling, to the small pull-down door that led to the attic. Dad had always been protective of that space. Just storage, he'd say whenever anyone asked. Nothing important. In 50 years, I'd only been up there a handful of times, and never without him. Something about the attic door seemed to call to me now. Maybe it was grief making me sentimental. Or maybe it was the thought of Mark and Caroline dividing up the house for an estate sale. Either way, I found myself pulling the stepladder from the hall closet and positioning it under the attic door. The door creaked open with a puff of dust. I pulled the chain for the single bulb that illuminated the space. The attic stretched the length of the house, the ceiling sloping sharply on both sides. Cardboard boxes were stacked neatly against the walls, all labeled in Dad's precise handwriting. Christmas decorations, tax records 1970-1980, Eleanor's school projects. But at the far end, tucked under the lowest part of the roof, was something different. A large trunk I'd never seen before. Unlike everything else in Dad's meticulously organized world, this trunk had no label. I made my way toward it, stepping carefully across the dusty floorboards. The trunk was old, the leather straps cracked with age. A small brass lock held it closed. I tried to remember if I'd ever seen a key, if Dad had ever mentioned a locked trunk in the attic. Nothing came to mind. I was about to head back downstairs when I noticed something gleaming in the dust beside the trunk, a small brass key on a faded red ribbon. My heart began to pound as I picked it up. The key was old, the design intricate, nothing like the modern keys we use today. I slid it into the lock, and with a satisfying click, the mechanism released. I lifted the heavy lid, and a musty smell rose from inside. Paper, leather, and something else I couldn't quite identify. On top was an envelope, yellowed with age, with a single word written across it in my father's handwriting, Eleanor. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a letter, the paper thin and delicate. My dearest Eleanor, if you're reading this, then I've passed on, and you've found the courage to look beyond what's comfortable and known. I've kept secrets from you, from everyone, for reasons that seemed necessary at the time. Perhaps they were, perhaps not. But you deserve to know the truth, especially now. What you'll find in this trunk isn't just old papers or forgotten mementos. It's a history that was nearly erased, a story that powerful people tried to bury. I was a witness, and later, a keeper of secrets I never chose to bear. The house isn't just a house, Eleanor. It's the only thing they couldn't take from us. The one place where the evidence remained safe. Your mother understood this. It's why she insisted we never sell, even when times were hard. Forgive me for not telling you while I lived. Some burdens are too heavy to share, some dangers too real to risk. But now the choice is yours. You can close this trunk, lock it away, again, sell the house and move on, or you can uncover what lies beneath decades of silence. Whatever you decide, know that I have always been proud of you and your strength. With all my love, Dad. I stared at the letter, reading it again and again. What secrets? What evidence? What dangers? With shaking hands, I began to lift the items from the trunk. Old newspapers, photographs I'd never seen, documents bearing official government seals, and beneath it all, a worn leather journal. I opened the journal to the first page and began to read. Within moments, I understood why Dad had kept it locked away all these years. Why the house mattered so much. Why he'd been so insistent it stay in the family. It wasn't just a house. It was a vault containing a truth so explosive it could rewrite history books. And now, that truth was mine to protect, or reveal. The following day, Mark and Caroline returned with a real estate agent. They hadn't bothered to ask my permission. She was a tall woman with platinum blonde hair pulled into a severe bun, wearing a red blazer that screamed ambition. Cynthia Morris, Premier Properties. That's what her gold name tag announced. Mrs. Harrington, what a pleasure to meet you, she said, extending a manicured hand. Your children tell me you're considering downsizing. Such a wise decision. This market won't stay hot forever. I didn't take her hand. Instead, I looked at my children, feeling something between betrayal and exhaustion. I haven't decided anything yet, I said quietly. Mark rolled his eyes like he used to when he was 14, and I wouldn't let him stay out past curfew. Mom, we're just getting information, no commitment. Caroline touched my arm. We're trying to help, Mom. You shouldn't have to deal with this alone. I noticed she was already wearing her mother's pearls, the ones I'd promised she could have after I was gone. Not when Dad died, when I died. I didn't ask for help, I replied, but I allowed them in, watching as Cynthia moved through my home. With a predatory eye, taking in the scuffed hardwood floors, the outdated kitchen cabinets, the cracked tile in the front hall. The location is excellent, she said, making notes on her tablet. But we'd need to discuss some updates to maximize value. Buyers today want open concept, stainless steel, smart home features. Mark nodded eagerly. We were thinking the same thing. Maybe stage it with some modern furniture? Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Absolutely, Cynthia agreed. We'll need to declutter significantly. Personal items, older furniture, all that would need to go into storage during showings. They were speaking about my life, my memories as if they were obstacles to be cleared away. The chair where I'd nursed both my children, the table where we'd celebrated 40 Thanksgiving dinners, the bookcase my husband built by hand, all reduced to clutter. I let them talk, let them walk through the rooms planning my erasure. All the while, my mind kept returning to the trunk in the attic, to Dad's letter, to the journal I'd stayed up all night reading. When they finally made their way upstairs, I followed closely behind. I'd closed the attic door and returned the stepladder to the closet. Some secrets weren't meant for casual discovery. This master bedroom has great potential, Cynthia was saying as she stepped into what had been my father's room. Southern exposure. Ensuite bath, though that would definitely need updating. My father passed away just 3 days ago, I said sharply. This was his room. Cynthia had the decency to look embarrassed. I'm so sorry for your loss, Mrs. Harrington. Perhaps this isn't the best time. No, I agreed. It isn't. After they left, with promises to touch base next week, I sat in Dad's room again, staring at the attic door. The weight of what I'd discovered pressed down on me like a physical thing. The journal belonged to my grandfather, William Reed. In it, he detailed his work as a codebreaker during World War II. Not just any codebreaker. He had been part of an elite team that intercepted and deciphered messages that ultimately changed the course of several major battles. Battles that history now credited to different intelligence sources, different strategic decisions. But that wasn't the explosive part. What made my hands shake as I turned those pages was his account of what happened after the war. How key officials had systematically erased his team's contributions. How documents were altered, records changed. How 3 of his colleagues died in suspicious accidents when they threatened to come forward with the truth. My grandfather had escaped with the original evidence, photographs, decoded messages, official communications, and hidden them away, changing his name from Reed to Warren, moving our family across the country, buying this house with its spacious attic where the truth could stay hidden. My father had inherited this secret when grandfather died. Now it had passed to me. The journal's final pages contained a list of names, powerful people whose legacies were built on stolen valor, whose families had risen to prominence based on achievements that weren't theirs. Some of those names I recognized immediately. One belonged to the current governor of our state, another to the CEO of a major defense contractor, a third to a recently deceased senator whose son was now following in his footsteps. My phone rang, startling me from my thoughts. Caroline. Mom, I know you're upset we brought Cynthia over without warning, but we're just trying to get ahead of things. The probate on Grandpa's will should clear next week, and then we can— There is no probate, I interrupted. Dad put the house in my name 5 years ago. It's already mine. A pause. Oh, well, that simplifies things. So, have you thought about when you might want to list? Mark found a really nice assisted living community that has openings. Assisted living? I felt heat rise in my face. Caroline, I'm 67 years old and in perfect health. I'm not going to an assisted living facility. Independent living, then, she amended quickly. The point is, you shouldn't be alone in that big house. It's not safe. What if you fall? What if someone breaks in? I've managed just fine for 8 years since your father died, and 5 years with just Dad for company. I think I can handle being on my own. But why would you want to? All those memories, all that upkeep. Wouldn't it be easier to start fresh? Easier for whom? I wanted to ask. For her and Mark, who lived in different states and visited twice a year? For whom the house was nothing but an inheritance to cash in? I need time to think, I said instead. Your grandfather just died. I'm still grieving. Of course, Mom. Take. All the time you need. Just don't wait too long. The market could shift. After we hung up, I went back to the attic. I spent hours going through the trunk's contents, organizing the papers, studying the photographs. One caught my eye. A group of 7 men standing in front of a nondescript building. My grandfather was on the far left, young and serious in his uniform. On the back, written in faded ink, "The Ghosts of Room 47." 6 of the 7 men had their names written beneath them. The 7th, standing in the center, was identified only as K. Something about his face seemed familiar, though I couldn't place it. As I kept digging, I found a small leather address book. Most of the entries were crossed out, deceased, I assumed. But one name had been circled, Margaret Winters, with an address in our city. My heart raced. Could this woman still be alive? Did she know something about my grandfather's work? About the secrets in this trunk? I needed to find out. Before my children returned with more real estate agents and retirement community brochures. Before they convinced me to sell the only place, where this history remained protected, I had to decide. Keep these secrets buried as my father and grandfather had done, or bring the truth to light after 60 years of silence. And I had to decide quickly. The world my children lived in had no patience for old houses or old secrets. They wanted everything neat, modern, profitable. They wanted to move forward without looking back. But I couldn't move forward until I understood what I was leaving behind, and why 2 generations of my family had sacrificed so much to keep these papers safe. 2 days after discovering the trunk, I couldn't stop thinking about the name in the address book. Margaret Winters. I needed to know if she was still alive. If she could tell me more about my grandfather and the secrets he'd kept. I searched online first. There were several Margaret Winters in the area, but none matched the age she would be now, mid-90s if she was still living. The address in the book was for Oakwood Avenue, a street that had been renamed decades, Ago to Veterans Memorial Drive, an irony that wasn't lost on me, given what I'd learned about erased military contributions. Before I could pursue this lead further, Caroline called. Her voice had that forced brightness she used when trying to manage me. "Mom, good news. Remember that retirement community I mentioned? They're having an open house this weekend. I thought we could go together. No pressure, just to look." I hesitated. Part of me wanted to tell her everything, to show her the trunk and its contents, to make her understand why this house mattered beyond its market value. But Dad's warnings about danger kept me silent. "I'm not sure this weekend works for me," I said. "What could you possibly have scheduled?" The brightness in her voice sharpened to an edge. "Mom, I'm flying in specifically for this. Mark's coming too." That surprised me. Both my children making a special trip? They hadn't visited at the same time since Christmas 3 years ago. "Actually," I said slowly, "I'd like you both to come. There's something I need to show you." "Is it about the house?" "Because it's important, Caroline. Just come with an open mind." After hanging up, I returned to the attic. I'd organized the materials from the trunk, trying to piece together the full story. My grandfather had been recruited to a top-secret program in 1943, joining 6 other men with exceptional skills in mathematics and linguistics. They were stationed in a nondescript building outside Washington, D.C., in a room designated only as 47. There, they intercepted and decoded messages that revealed German troop movements, supply routes, and attack plans. According to my grandfather's detailed accounts, their work had directly influenced the outcomes at Normandy and the Battle of the Bulge, among others. But after the war, something changed. A man referred to only as director began a systematic campaign to redirect credit for their intelligence coups. Official records were altered. The team was disbanded and sworn to secrecy under the National Security Act. My grandfather wrote about meetings with increasingly higher authorities, trying to get recognition for his team. Then the deaths began. First Henry Collins, car accident. Then James Mercer, heart attack at 43. Then Paul Whitman, suicide allegedly. That's when my grandfather ran, taking what evidence he could gather. He changed our family name from Reed to Warren, moved us across the country, and bought this house with its spacious hidden attic. Among the papers was a typed document with the heading Operation Legacy. It detailed the deliberate reattribution of wartime intelligence successes to bolster the reputations of certain well-connected families that went on to build political dynasties on the backs of these false achievements. He was so absorbed in these revelations that I didn't hear the doorbell at first. When it rang a second time, more insistently, I quickly closed the journal and headed downstairs. Through the peephole, I saw a man in a dark suit standing on my porch. He was maybe 50, with close-cropped gray hair and the rigid posture of someone with military training. I opened the door cautiously, keeping the security chain in place. "Mrs. Harrington?" he asked, his voice pleasant but formal. "I'm Thomas Blake, from the Department of Veterans Affairs. I understand your father recently passed away. Warren Harrington, correct?" My pulse quickened. "Yes. What's this about?" "We're doing some archive updates, and we came across some old files related to your grandfather, William Warren. I was hoping to ask you a few questions." William Warren, not William Reed. This man knew the changed name, the name that appeared on all official documents. "How?" "My grandfather died decades ago," I said. "I'm not sure how I can help." Family often have heirlooms, papers, photographs, things that help us complete our historical records. "May I come in?" Every instinct told me not to let this man into my house. "I'm sorry, this isn't a good time. Perhaps you could leave your card, and I can contact you if I find anything relevant." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Of course. He pulled out a business card and handed it through the gap in the door. "Please do call if you come across anything interesting. Old medals, photographs, journals, anything at all." I took the card, nodding non-committally. "I'll keep that in mind." After he left, I examined the card. Thomas Blake, Special Consultant, Department of Veterans Affairs, a phone number, an email address. It all looked official. Too official. I went to my computer and searched for Thomas Blake at the VA. Nothing. I called the department's main number and asked about him. The receptionist had no record of a Thomas Blake working as a consultant. My hands shook as I hung up. They knew. Somehow they knew I'd found the trunk. My father had been right about the danger. After 60 years, someone was still protecting these secrets. I needed to work faster. I returned to the address book and decided to visit the old Oakwood Avenue address in person. It was now a small apartment building on Veterans Memorial Drive. I asked the superintendent about previous tenants, showing him the name Margaret Winters. "That's before my time," he said. "But old Mrs. Peterson in 3B has been here since the building opened. She might remember." Mrs. Peterson was tiny and frail, but her mind was sharp. When I mentioned Margaret Winters, her eyes lit up. "Maggie. Oh my, I haven't heard that name in years. Lovely woman, very private. Always wore those beautiful scarves even in summer." She tapped her neck meaningfully. "Do you know where she went? When she moved out?" "Sunset Valley Nursing Home must be. 20 years ago now. Her nephew moved her there when she couldn't manage on her own anymore." I thanked her and headed straight to Sunset Valley. It was a long shot. 20 years was a long time, and Margaret would be well into her 90s now. At the reception desk, I hesitated. What was I doing here? Chasing ghosts? Risking drawing more attention from men like Thomas Blake? But I'd come too far to turn back. "I'm looking for information about a former resident," I told the receptionist. "Margaret Winters. She would have been admitted around 20 years ago." The young woman checked her computer, then looked up with surprise. "Margaret Winters is still a resident here. Wing C, room 219. My heart leaped. She's alive? Can I see her? Visiting hours end at 8. But I should warn you, Ms. Winters doesn't receive many visitors, and she has good days and bad days. I thanked her and made my way to Wing C. Outside room 219, I paused, gathering my courage. What would I say? How could I explain why I was here, asking about classified work from 70 years ago? I knocked softly and entered. The room was bathed in late afternoon sunlight. A small woman sat in a wheelchair by the window, a colorful scarf wrapped around her neck despite the warmth of the day. Her white hair was styled in an elegant wave, and though her body seemed frail, her eyes were alert and questioning as she looked at me. "Margaret Winters?" I asked. She nodded slowly. "Who wants to know?" I stepped closer. "My name is Eleanor Harrington. My grandfather was William Reed, later known as William Warren." Her face remained impassive, but her hands gripped the arms of her wheelchair tightly. "I don't know any William Reed," she said carefully. I lowered my voice. "Room 47, the ghosts. I found his journal." The color drained from her face. "Close the door," she whispered. I closed the door and approached Margaret's wheelchair. Up close, I could see the intelligence in her eyes, the careful assessment as she looked me over. "Show me proof," she said, voice stronger now. "Anyone could come in here claiming to know about room 47. I reached into my purse and pulled out a folded photograph, the one of the 7 men, including my grandfather, standing in front of the nondescript building. I handed it to her. Margaret's hands trembled as she took it. She stared at the image for a long moment, running one thin finger over the faces. When she looked up, her eyes glistened with tears. "I never thought I'd see this photograph again. They took everything, you know. Even our personal mementos." She pointed to the figure labeled only as K in the center. "That's Catherine, not a K name for a man. Catherine Bell, the only woman on the team. They erased her completely, not just her accomplishments, but her very presence." I sat down on the edge of the bed, stunned. The 7th person was a woman? My grandfather's journal only refers to K. We all used single letters in our notes. Security protocol. But yes, Catherine was our team leader, brilliant mathematician. She's the one who developed the hybrid decryption method that finally broke the Enigma variations. Margaret shook her head. "History says that breakthrough came from Alan Turing's team at Bletchley Park. Just another lie." "You were part of the team too?" I asked. "Your name wasn't in the photograph." Margaret smiled slightly. "I was behind. The camera. 8th member, support staff officially. But I did more than brew coffee. I handled the radio intercepts. Was damn good at it too." She adjusted her scarf, and I caught a glimpse of scarring on her neck before she covered it again. "What happened?" I asked softly. "My grandfather's journal mentions deaths, threats, but not the full story." Margaret's gaze drifted to the window. "When the war ended, the director, a man named Lawrence Sullivan, came to our unit. He'd been appointed to oversee intelligence reorganization. He saw an opportunity in our work." She looked back at me, eyes sharp. "Do you understand how intelligence operations actually win wars, Mrs. Harrington?" "By providing information to commanders," I ventured. "By providing the right information at the right time to the right people," she corrected. "We saved thousands of lives by giving field commanders crucial details hours, or sometimes just minutes before they needed to make decisions. The credit for those victories went to the commanders, as it should. But Sullivan saw another possibility. Operation Legacy," I said. Margaret's eyebrows rose. "You found that document? William was thorough, wasn't he?" She nodded slowly. "Yes, Operation Legacy. Sullivan's grand plan to rewrite intelligence history. Certain families had sons who'd served in military intelligence during the war, but in relatively minor roles. Sullivan proposed a trade. He would..." Attribute our team's most significant breakthroughs to these men, enhancing their reputations and future prospects. In exchange, these families would support Sullivan's bid to lead the newly forming Central Intelligence Group, which later became the CIA. But why would he think he could get away with that? I asked. Surely there were records, witnesses. Margaret's laugh was bitter. In the chaos after the war, with agencies being reorganized, documents being classified and reclassified, it was the perfect environment for a paper shuffle. As for witnesses, there were only 8 of us who knew the full scope of our work. Sullivan assumed we'd fall in line, take the generous pensions and reassignments he offered. But you didn't. Catherine refused first. Said she wouldn't let them erase our work, especially not to prop up some empty suits who'd spent the war pushing papers in Washington. Sullivan threatened her, but she was fearless. Started gathering evidence, contacting people she trusted in the War Department. Margaret paused, her expression darkening. 2 days later, her apartment caught fire. They found her body in the rubble. I gasped. They killed her? Officially, it was faulty wiring, but we knew. William knew especially. He and Catherine had been close. She looked at me meaningfully. Very close. A chill ran through me. Were they in love? Yes, planning to marry after the war. Catherine's death destroyed him. That's when he started collecting evidence, making duplicate records. Henry, James, and Paul joined him. The rest of us were too afraid. Her hand went to her scarf again. I tried to warn William that they were onto him. That's when I got this. She pulled the scarf down, revealing an old scar across her throat. Sullivan's man used a knife. I survived, barely. They called it a mugging. I felt sick. And after the other 3 died, William ran. She nodded. Smart move. He disappeared. So completely even I couldn't find him. I always wondered what happened to him, if he'd kept the evidence safe. Her eyes fixed on me intently. And now his granddaughter shows up at my door. Why now, Eleanor? Why are you digging into this ancient history? I told her about my father's death, about my children wanting to sell the house, about finding the trunk in the attic. I mentioned Thomas Blake's visit. Margaret's face paled at the mention of Blake. They're still watching. After all these years, they're still protecting those families. But why? The men Sullivan helped are surely dead by now. The men, yes, but not their legacies, not their descendants. She leaned forward. Do you know who Congressman James Sullivan is? I nodded. Rising star in the House. There's talk he might run for president next cycle. Lawrence Sullivan's grandson, the director's bloodline, still benefiting from the lies. She gripped my hand suddenly, her fingers surprisingly strong. The Petersons, the Galloways, the Sullivans. They built political dynasties on stolen valor. 3 generations of power, wealth, and influence, all stemming from Operation Legacy. They won't let that foundation be questioned even now. I thought about the names in my grandfather's journal. Senator Peterson, Governor Galloway, Defense Secretary Sullivan, a lineage of power built on lies. What should I do? I asked. My children want to sell the house. If they do, all of this evidence could be lost. But if I try to bring it forward, you could end up like Catherine. Or me. Margaret released my hand and straightened in her wheelchair. I've waited 70 years for this moment, for someone to come with proof, with William's testimony. Her voice grew stronger. I'm 94 years old, Eleanor. What more can they take from me? Nothing. But you have a life, a family. They're part of why I'm here, I said. My children think I'm just a foolish old woman clinging to a house. They have no idea what their great-grandfather sacrificed, what he protected. Margaret studied me for a long moment. Do you want justice, Eleanor? Or do you just want to keep your house? The question struck me like a physical blow. I hadn't fully confronted my own motivations until that moment. What did I truly want? Both, I finally answered. I want my children to understand why this house matters. And I want the truth to be known about my grandfather, about Catherine, about all of you. Margaret nodded, seemingly satisfied with my answer. Then I have something for you, something even William didn't know about. She pointed to a small chest of drawers beside her bed. Bottom drawer, under the sweaters. There's a manila envelope. I retrieved it. Inside was a small blue notebook. Catherine's personal journal, Margaret explained. She gave it to me for safekeeping the day before she died. She knew they were coming for her. In it, she named names, dates, operations, everything. And she included something else, something none of the men knew about. What? I asked, hardly daring to breathe. Insurance. Catherine wasn't just brilliant. She was cunning. She microfilmed key documents and hid them where Sullivan would never think to look. The location is in that journal. Margaret's eyes burned with intensity. Find it, Eleanor. Complete what William started, what Catherine died for. As I left Sunset Valley with Catherine's journal clutched in my purse, I felt simultaneously terrified and determined. The pieces were coming together now. I finally understood what my grandfather and father had been protecting all these years. Not just evidence of historical fraud, but a direct link to a woman who had been deliberately erased from history. A woman my grandfather had loved. A woman who might have been my grandmother in another life. And now I had to decide what to do with this knowledge before my children arrived to try to convince me, once again, that the house and all its secrets needed to be sold. The following morning, I woke early. Catherine's journal open beside me. I'd stayed up half the night reading her intimate thoughts, her brilliant observations, her growing suspicion that something was wrong in the chain of command. The final entries were heartbreaking, her excitement about marrying William after the war, her plans for their future, and then her dawning realization that Sullivan was systematically erasing their work. The last entry was dated just one day before her death. If anything happens to me, the proof is safe. Microfilm hidden where S would never look. With Evelyn's portrait at the National Gallery. Will knows which one. I closed the journal, my mind racing. Evelyn's portrait at the National Gallery. What could that mean? Was it still there after all these years? And how would I find it without William to guide me? The sharp ring of the doorbell startled me. Through the window, I saw another dark sedan parked across the street, different from the one Thomas Blake had arrived in, but similar enough to send a chill through me. I approached the door cautiously and looked through the peephole. A woman stood on my porch, perhaps in her 60s, dressed in a tailored pantsuit. She didn't look threatening, but after yesterday's visit, I wasn't taking chances. "Who is it?" I called through the door. "Mrs. Harrington? My name is Dr. Evelyn Miller. I'm a historian with the National Archives. I was hoping to speak with you about your grandfather, William Warren." Evelyn, the name from Catherine's journal. Coincidence? "How did you know to find me?" I asked, still not opening the door. "Your grandfather's military service records were recently flagged for digitization. I noticed some inconsistencies. When I started researching, I found you were his only living descendant." She paused. "Mrs. Harrington, I believe your grandfather was part of a classified intelligence unit during World War II, a unit whose work has never been properly acknowledged." My heart pounded. Could she be legitimate? Or was this another attempt to locate my grandfather's evidence? "Show me some identification," I said. "Slide it under the door." She complied without hesitation. I picked up her ID card. Dr. Evelyn Miller, Senior Archivist, National Archives and Records Administration. It looked authentic, but so had Thomas Blake's card. "Dr. Miller, I'm going to call the National Archives to verify your employment. Please wait." "Of course," she agreed easily. "That's very sensible." I called the archive's main number and asked, "For Dr. Evelyn Miller." After a brief hold, I was connected. "This is Dr. Miller's office," a young man answered. "I'm trying to confirm that Dr. Miller is currently employed by the National Archives," I said. "Yes, she's a senior archivist in our military records division. She's out of the office today on research. May I take a message?" I thanked him and hung up. That checked out, at least. I returned to the door and opened it, though I left the security chain engaged. Dr. Miller smiled. "I understand your caution, Mrs. Harrington. May I come in? What I have to discuss is rather sensitive." I studied her face. There was something earnest in her expression, something that seemed trustworthy. But I'd been wrong before. "How do I know you're not working for the people who want to keep my grandfather's work buried?" Her eyebrows rose. "So you do know something about it." "Mrs. Harrington, I've spent the last 15 years researching overlooked contributions to intelligence operations during World War II. 6 months ago, I came across a reference to Room 47 in a declassified memo. Since then, I've been trying to piece together what happened to that unit and why their work was reassigned to others." I hesitated, then made a decision. I unlatched the chain and opened the door. "Come in, Dr. Miller. But I warn you, if you're not who you say you are—" "I understand," she said, stepping inside. "And please, call me Evelyn." Evelyn. The name from Catherine's journal. The portrait at the National Gallery. In the living room, Evelyn declined my offer of tea and got straight to the point. "Mrs. Harrington, I believe your grandfather was part of an elite code-breaking unit that made significant contributions to Allied strategy. I also believe those contributions were deliberately attributed to others after the war. What I don't know is why or how extensively the historical record was altered." I studied her carefully. "And if I had evidence of this, what would you do with it?" "Bring it to light, of course. Correct the historical record. Make sure these men and women received proper recognition for their service. Even if that evidence implicated powerful families with ongoing political influence." Evelyn's expression grew more serious. "Mrs. Harrington, what exactly do you have?" I made another decision. I went to the sideboard and returned, with Catherine's journal, placing it on the coffee table between us. This belonged to Catherine Bell. She led the Room 47 team. Evelyn's eyes widened. She reached for the journal with trembling hands. "Catherine Bell? There's no mention of a woman leading any code-breaking unit in any of the records I've seen." "That's because they erased her. Completely. After they killed her." Evelyn looked up sharply. "Killed her? I told her everything. About my grandfather's journal, about Margaret Winters, about Operation Legacy and the Sullivan family's rise to power." As I spoke, Evelyn's expression shifted from academic interest to horror, and finally to determination. When I finished, she sat back, processing it all. "This is monumental. If we can verify this evidence, it would rewrite a significant chapter of intelligence history." She looked at me intently. "But you're right to be cautious. If what you say is true, there are powerful people who would prefer this remained buried. Someone named Thomas Blake already came asking questions. He claimed to be from Veterans Affairs, but they've never heard of him." Evelyn frowned. "That's concerning. Mrs. Harrington—" "Eleanor, please. Eleanor, I think you need to secure this evidence immediately. If they know you've found it, they won't stop looking." "That's why I can't sell this house," I said. "My children don't understand. They think I'm being sentimental, but this place has protected these secrets for decades." "Maybe there's another way," Evelyn suggested. "The archives could take possession of the materials, place them in secure storage while we authenticate them. Once they're in our custody, they become federal property. Anyone interfering would be committing a federal crime." The idea had appeal, but I hesitated. "My father and grandfather kept these secrets for a reason. How do I know the archives won't bury them too?" "Because I won't let them," Evelyn said firmly. "And neither will this." She reached into her bag and pulled out a slim folder. I've been collecting my own evidence about room 47. Nothing as substantial as what you have, but enough to establish that the unit existed and that their work was significant. If your evidence disappeared after being logged into the archives, that would raise too many questions. I considered her proposal. Before I agree to anything, there's something in Catherine's journal we need to find. She mentioned hiding microfilm with Evelyn's portrait at the National Gallery. Does that mean anything to you? Evelyn's brow furrowed. Evelyn's portrait. Wait. Her eyes lit up. John Singer Sargent's portrait of Lady Evelyn Cavendish. It was part of the National Gallery's collection during the war years. Catherine must have hidden something in or near the frame. Is it still there, after all these years? The portrait was returned to the Cavendish family in England in the 1950s, but the frames often remain with the museum when paintings are repatriated. We'd need to check the gallery's storage archives. She smiled suddenly. I have colleagues. There. I could make inquiries without raising suspicion. For the first time since finding the trunk, I felt a spark of hope. Maybe there was a way to honor my grandfather's legacy while protecting myself and my family. There's something else, I said. My children are coming this weekend. They want me to sell the house. I need to decide what to tell them. Evelyn nodded thoughtfully. That's certainly complicated. How much do you trust them? The question gave me pause. I loved my children, but their eagerness to liquidate their grandfather's house without understanding its significance troubled me. Would they value this historical truth over a quick property sale? I'm not sure, I admitted. They see me as a burden to manage, not as someone with my own purpose. Then perhaps we should secure the evidence before they arrive, Evelyn suggested. I can come back tomorrow with proper archival materials. We'll document everything properly, create a formal donation to the archives, and then investigate the National Gallery lead together. I nodded, my decision made. Yes, it's time these secrets saw the light of day. It's what my grandfather would have wanted, what Catherine would have wanted. As Evelyn left, promising to return the next morning, I felt a weight lifting. For decades, my family had been guardians of a buried truth. Now, finally, I would become its champion instead. I spent the rest of the day organizing the materials from the trunk, preparing them for proper archival storage. As I handled each document, each photograph, I felt closer to my grandfather than I ever had in life. I understood now why he'd changed our name, why he'd moved us across the country, why he'd built this house with its hidden spaces. He hadn't been running away. He'd been protecting Catherine's legacy and her final gift to history, a gift I was now determined to deliver, no matter the cost. The next morning dawned with a sense of urgency. I'd barely slept, my mind racing with questions about Catherine's microfilm, about what my children would say, about whether Evelyn Miller was truly trustworthy. I'd called Margaret at Sunset Valley to tell her about Evelyn's visit. Margaret had been cautiously optimistic, but warned me to proceed carefully. Even well-meaning people can be manipulated, Eleanor, she'd said. Make sure this historian understands what she's getting into. I was in the kitchen making coffee when my phone rang. It was Caroline. Mom, good news. We've managed to get an early flight. Mark and I will be there this afternoon instead of tomorrow morning. My stomach dropped. Today? But I thought, isn't it great? We'll have more time to visit that retirement community I told you about. And Mark's bringing some paperwork for you to look at. Just preliminary stuff about the house. Caroline, I told you I have something important to show you both first. She sighed. Yes, I remember. Old photo albums or something? We can certainly make time for that, Mom. But the real estate market waits for no one, as they say. I bit back my frustration. Just keep an open mind when you get here. That's all I ask. Of course, Mom. We'll see you around 3. After hanging up, I called Evelyn immediately. She answered on the second ring. Eleanor? I was just on my way over with the archival materials. My children are coming early, this afternoon. We need to move quickly. I understand. I'll be there within the hour. True to her word, Evelyn arrived 45 minutes later with acid-free folders, archival boxes, cotton gloves, and a digital camera to document everything before it was packed away. We worked efficiently, with Evelyn maintaining meticulous notes about each item's provenance and condition. "These are extraordinary," she murmured as we examined the decoded messages that had helped plan the Normandy invasion. "The level of detail, the accuracy. It's no wonder the Allies succeeded where conventional wisdom said they should have failed." By noon, we had catalogued and properly stored most of the trunk's contents. Evelyn had also prepared a formal donation document, transferring custody of the materials to the National Archives for study, preservation, and eventual public accessibility. "Once you sign this," she explained, "these documents become federal property. It would take a court order to suppress them." I hesitated, pen hovering over the signature line. "And you're certain they won't just disappear into some classified vault?" "I've listed myself as the primary researcher and curator for the collection. Nothing gets filed away without my approval." Her expression was solemn. "Eleanor, I swear to you I will not let these people be forgotten again." I signed the document, feeling a strange mixture of relief and loss. For 3 generations, my family had been the guardians of this truth. Now I was passing that responsibility to someone else. "What about Catherine's microfilm?" I asked as Evelyn carefully packed the last of the boxes into her car. "I've already contacted my colleague at the National Gallery. She's checking their frame storage archives this afternoon. With any luck, we'll know something by tomorrow." We agreed that Evelyn would take the materials directly to the secure storage facility at the archives, then return tomorrow to accompany me to the National Gallery if her colleague found anything promising. As Evelyn's car disappeared down the street, I noticed another vehicle parked across the way, a dark sedan with tinted windows. Thomas Blake, or someone like him, was still watching. The realization sent a chill through me, but also strengthened my resolve. I'd done the right thing, getting the evidence to safety. Now I just had to face my children. Mark and Caroline arrived at precisely 3 o'clock, both dressed as if coming from business meetings rather than flights. Caroline embraced me warmly, while Mark merely patted my shoulder before setting his briefcase on the entry table. "The place looks exactly the same," Caroline said, glancing around the living room. "Don't you ever get tired of these old curtains, Mom?" "They were your grandmother's," I replied. "And no, I find them comforting." Mark checked his watch. "We have a 4:30 appointment at Sunrise Meadows. Should give us plenty of time to discuss the house situation first." "Actually," I said, gesturing toward the couch, "why don't we sit down? There's something I need to tell you both." Caroline and Mark exchanged a look I recognized from their teenage years, the one that said, "Mom's being difficult again." "Is this about the important thing you wanted to show us?" Caroline asked, sitting reluctantly. "Yes." I took a deep breath. "After your grandfather died, I found something in the attic. Something he'd been protecting for decades." I explained. About the trunk, about William's journal, about Margaret Winters and Catherine Bell. I told them about Operation Legacy, about the families who had built political dynasties on stolen valor. As I spoke, their expressions shifted from polite indulgence to confusion to disbelief. "Mom," Mark interrupted finally, "this sounds— I'm sorry, but it sounds delusional. Secret code breakers, government conspiracies, murdered war heroines." "I have proof," I said. "Or rather, I had proof. I've transferred the materials to the National Archives for preservation and study." "You what?" Caroline exclaimed. "Without consulting us?" "Mom, if Grandpa really had valuable historical documents, they could have been appraised. There might have been tax implications. This isn't about money," I said sharply. "This is about justice, about truth." Mark leaned forward, his expression softening into the condescending concern I'd come to dread. "Mom, I think perhaps Dad's death, and now Grandpa's. It's a lot of loss in a short time. Sometimes grief can make us see patterns that aren't really there." "I'm not imagining things, Mark. A historian from the National Archives confirmed everything. She's helping me locate the final piece of evidence, microfilm that Catherine hid, before she died." Caroline sighed. "Mom, listen to yourself. This sounds like something from a spy novel, not real life." "Real life is often stranger than fiction," I replied, struggling to keep my voice steady. "Your great-grandfather was a hero who had his achievements stolen. His colleagues were killed to keep them quiet. He spent his life protecting evidence of the truth, and your grandfather continued that protection. Now it's my turn." Mark opened his briefcase and pulled out a folder. "Mom, we've already spoken to a real estate agent. Cynthia thinks we can list the house by next week. We've found a wonderful assisted living facility with an immediate opening." "I'm not selling this house," I interrupted. "It's not just a building. It's the vault that protected these secrets for 60 years. "Mom," Caroline said gently, "the house is too big for you. The maintenance alone is manageable. I've been handling it just fine." "But why would you want to?" Mark pressed. "This obsession with Grandpa's conspiracy theories." "They're not theories," I snapped. "They're facts. Facts I've seen with my own eyes. Facts confirmed by Margaret Winters, who nearly died trying to warn my grandfather." "And where is this—" "Margaret Winters?" Mark challenged. "Where's this historian who supposedly confirmed everything?" "Margaret is at Sunset Valley Nursing Home. Dr. Miller will be back tomorrow to take me to the National Gallery to look for the microfilm." Caroline and Mark exchanged another look. "Mom," Caroline said slowly, "I think we should consider having you evaluated by a doctor. These delusions, they're not delusions." I stood up, anger finally breaking through. "You're so eager to pack me away, to sell off this house, that you can't even consider I might know what I'm talking about. You haven't asked a single question about the evidence I found. You haven't expressed any interest in your own family history. All you care about is the real estate value." "That's not fair," Mark protested. "We're worried about you, living alone, getting fixated on these stories." "Stories?" I repeated. "Your great-grandmother was erased from history, killed to protect powerful men, and you dismiss it as stories?" The doorbell rang, cutting through our argument. All three of us froze, then looked toward the door. "Are you expecting someone?" Caroline asked. "No," I replied, moving cautiously to the peephole. On my porch stood Thomas Blake, and beside him, a younger man in an equally nondescript suit. Behind them, on the street, the dark sedan waited. "Who is it?" Mark asked, coming up behind me. "Thomas Blake," I whispered. "The man who came asking questions about Grandpa's papers." Mark frowned. "Let me handle this." Before I could stop him, he unlocked the door and swung it open. "Can I help you?" Mark asked, standing protectively in the doorway. Thomas Blake smiled, the same empty smile he'd given me before. "Good afternoon. I'm looking for Eleanor Harrington." "I'm her son, Mark Warren. What's this about?" Blake's eyes flickered past Mark to where I stood, my heart pounding against my ribs. "Mrs. Harrington and I spoke earlier this week about some family papers that might be of historical interest. I was hoping to follow up." Mark glanced back at me, then at Blake again. "My mother isn't feeling well today. Perhaps you could leave your contact information, and she can reach out when she's better." "I'm afraid this matter is quite urgent," Blake insisted, his pleasant demeanor unwavering. "We have reason to believe Mrs. Harrington may have materials relevant to national security." Caroline had moved beside me now, her hand on my arm. "Mom, what's going on?" she whispered. I squeezed her hand, finding unexpected strength in her presence. "It's what I was trying to tell you. They're still protecting the lie. After all these years." Mark's posture had stiffened. Mr. Blake, was it? Do you have identification? Blake produced his badge, the same Veterans Affairs ID he'd shown me before. Department of Veterans Affairs? Mark said skeptically. How does that involve national security? Certain wartime records fall under our purview, Blake explained, smoothly. Particularly those involving classified operations. I see. Mark's tone had changed. I recognized his courtroom voice emerging. And do you have a warrant to search these premises or to compel my mother to turn over private family documents? Blake's smile tightened slightly. This isn't a criminal matter, Mr. Warren. We're simply trying to ensure proper handling of sensitive materials. Nevertheless, Mark continued, my mother has the right to decline your assistance unless you have proper legal documentation requesting these specific materials. He straightened to his full height. I'm an attorney, Mr. Blake. I understand exactly what rights my mother has regarding family papers. I felt a surge of pride watching Mark stand up to Blake. Despite dismissing my story, he was still protecting me. Blake's expression hardened. Your grandfather was William Warren, formerly William Reed, correct? He served in a specialized intelligence unit during World War II. Any materials he retained from that service remain government property. Really? Mark replied. Then I'm sure you can provide documentation establishing government ownership of these alleged materials. Perhaps a detailed inventory of what you believe my mother possesses. The younger man behind Blake shifted uncomfortably, but Blake maintained his composure. Mr. Warren, I don't think you understand the sensitivity of— Oh, I understand perfectly, Mark interrupted. You're making claims without documentation, requesting access to private property without a warrant, and implying threats regarding national security without establishing your jurisdiction. He pulled out his phone. Shall I call the actual authorities to sort this out? I watched Blake's calculation play across his face. He hadn't expected this resistance. That won't be necessary, he said finally. We'll return with the proper documentation. He handed Mark his card. Please ensure your mother doesn't dispose of any materials related to William Reed in the meantime. My mother is free to do whatever she wishes with her property, Mark replied, pocketing the card without looking at. Good day, gentlemen. He closed the door firmly and engaged all 3 locks before turning to face me. Mom, he said, his voice a mixture of confusion and concern. What the hell is going on? We returned to the living room, where I repeated my explanation, this time with Mark and Caroline listening intently rather than dismissively. So you're saying Grandpa was actually part of some secret code-breaking unit, and the government stole credit for their work to boost certain families? Caroline asked. Not the government as a whole, I clarified. A specific man, Lawrence Sullivan, who wanted to advance his career and forge alliances with influential families. He created false records attributing my grandfather's team's work to men with better connections. And Sullivan's grandson is Congressman James Sullivan? Mark asked, frowning. The one they're talking about for a presidential run? I nodded. The Sullivan political dynasty was built on the first lie. Along with the Petersons and the Galloways. Mark rubbed his temple. Even if this is true, Mom, it happened 70 years ago. Why would they still be covering it up? Because exposure would undermine everything they've built, I explained. Imagine the headlines, Sullivan family's political legacy founded on stolen valor. War heroes murdered to protect political ambitions. It would destroy them. Mark paced the room, attorney's mind clearly working through the implications. And you've given all the evidence to this Dr. Miller? Are you certain she's legitimate? I verified her identity with the National Archives, I said. And she's helping me find the final piece of evidence, microfilm that Catherine hid at the National Gallery before she died. Caroline had been unusually quiet. Now she looked up, her expression thoughtful. That man, Blake, he seemed genuinely concerned about what you might have. That lends credibility to your story. I nearly laughed. You believe me because someone threatened me? She shrugged. It makes more sense than government agents harassing an elderly woman over nothing. Thanks for that ringing endorsement, I said dryly. Mark sat down heavily. So what now? If this Blake person comes back with actual legal paperwork, there's nothing for them to find, I assured him. Everything is safely at the National Archives. The only thing left is to locate Catherine's microfilm. And how do you plan to do that? Caroline asked. Dr. Miller has a colleague checking the National Gallery's frame storage. We're hoping Catherine hid the microfilm in or near a particular portrait frame. Mark shook his head. This is a lot to process, Mom. Yesterday we thought we were helping you move into a comfortable retirement. Today we're dealing with government agents and decades-old conspiracies. I know it's overwhelming, I acknowledged. But now you understand why I can't sell this house. It's not just sentiment. This place protected vital historical truth for 60 years. Caroline squeezed my hand. I'm sorry I didn't listen earlier, Mom. We should have given you more credit. The tension in the room had shifted. My children were looking at me differently, not as a burden to manage, but as someone with purpose, with a story that mattered. My phone rang, breaking the moment. It was Evelyn. Eleanor? Good news. My colleague found something in the storage archives, an original Sargent frame, removed when Lady Evelyn's portrait was returned to England. There's definitely something hidden in the backing. Can you come to the gallery tomorrow morning? Yes, I replied, excitement building. My children are here, they'll come with me. After explaining the development to Mark and Caroline, we agreed to postpone the retirement community visit. Instead, we spent the evening looking through the few items I'd kept from the trunk, photographs I couldn't bear to part with, including the one of the Room 47 team. That's Catherine? Caroline asked, pointing to the figure in the center. She's beautiful and brilliant, according to Margaret Winters. She developed the decryption method that helped win the war. Mark studied the photograph. So if Grandpa hadn't run, if he'd stayed and fought to expose the truth, he might have been killed too, I finished. He made the only choice he could to protect the evidence and to protect our family. As we talked late into the night, I felt a shift in our relationship. For the first time in years, my children were seeing me as something more than their aging mother. They were seeing me as the keeper of an important legacy, as someone with a mission beyond simply existing. When morning came, we prepared to leave for the National Gallery. As we stepped onto the porch, I noticed the dark sedan was gone. In its place was a police car, parked discreetly down the street. I called in a favor, Mark explained, following my gaze. A friend from law school is with the local precinct. I told him we'd had some concerning visitors. He arranged for a patrol to keep an eye on the house. I smiled, deeply touched by this protective gesture. Thank you. Mom, he said seriously, I'm sorry I dismissed your story. Whatever we find at the gallery today, I want you to know I believe you now. Together, we got into Mark's rental car and headed toward what I hoped would be the final piece of Catherine Bell's legacy and my grandfather's vindication. The National Gallery loomed before us, its classical facade imposing against the morning sky. Evelyn was waiting on the steps, clipboard in hand, looking both professional and slightly anxious. She smiled with visible relief when she spotted us approaching. Eleanor, thank you for coming, she said, then glanced at Mark and Caroline with questioning eyes. These are my children, Mark and Caroline, I explained. They know everything now, and they're here to help. Evelyn nodded, extending her hand to each of them. Dr. Evelyn Miller, I'm glad you're supporting your mother in this. What she's uncovered is historically significant. Mark shook her hand firmly. We had some visitors yesterday after you left. A man named Thomas Blake and an associate. Evelyn's expression darkened. Did they threaten you? Not explicitly, I said. But they seemed very interested in obtaining any materials related to my grandfather. All the more reason to secure Catherine's microfilm as quickly as possible, Evelyn replied. My colleague Diane is waiting for us in the conservation lab. She's cleared it of other staff for the next hour. We followed Evelyn through a side entrance, using her ID badge to access areas closed to the public. The conservation lab was a large, well-lit room filled with specialized equipment, work tables, and carefully controlled environmental systems. Slender woman with silver-streaked dark hair looked up from a work table as we entered. Dr. Miller, right on time. Thank you for arranging this, Diane, Evelyn said. This is Eleanor Harrington, William Reed's granddaughter, and her children, Mark and Caroline. Diane nodded to us, then gestured to a large picture frame lying on the table. This is the original frame from Sargent's portrait of Lady Evelyn Cavendish. When the painting was returned to England in 1952, the museum kept the frame, as was common practice. I approached the table, my heart beating faster. The frame was ornate gold, with carved acanthus leaves at the corners. It looked ordinary enough, but this could be the key to everything. I've examined it thoroughly, Diane continued. There's definitely something hidden in the backing. She carefully turned the frame over, revealing the dusty paper backing. See this section here? The paper has been cut and reattached with different adhesive than the rest. Mark leaned in, his attorney's attention to detail evident. Can you remove it safely? That's why we're in the conservation lab, Diane replied with a small smile. She donned a pair of cotton gloves and selected several delicate tools from a nearby tray. I'll go slowly to preserve whatever's inside. We watched in tense silence as Diane carefully loosened the edges of the paper backing, using a tiny spatula to separate the adhesive without tearing the material. After several painstaking minutes, she peeled back a section of the paper. There's something here, she murmured, reaching for a pair of tweezers. With utmost care, she extracted a small metal container about the size of a pocket watch. It was tarnished with age, but appeared intact. A film canister, Evelyn breathed. Standard military issue for microfilm during the war. Diane placed it gently on a clean cloth. Do you want to open it? Evelyn looked at me. Eleanor, this is your family's legacy. Would you like to do the honors? My hands trembled slightly as I reached for the canister. This small metal container had waited silently for 70 years, holding Catherine Bell's final testimony. I felt the weight of history as I carefully turned the lid. Inside was a tightly rolled strip of microfilm, preserved in the airless container. Beside it was a tiny folded note, the paper yellowed but still legible. William, it read simply, the truth survives. All my love, Kay. I felt tears spring to my eyes. Catherine had hidden this final piece of evidence, trusting that my grandfather would someday find it. She couldn't have known he would flee, change his name, start a new life. She couldn't have known their love would be cut short by Sullivan's ruthless ambition. We can view the microfilm right away, Diane said, gesturing to a microfilm reader in the corner of the lab. It's an older model, but it should work perfectly for this vintage. Evelyn carefully took the film and prepared it for viewing. We gathered around the reader as she threaded the film and switched on the light. Images appeared on the screen. Military documents with top secret stamped across them. Operational orders showing Room 47 as the source of critical intelligence. Mission success reports crediting their decryptions. And most damning of all, a memo from Lawrence Sullivan outlining what would later be called Operation Legacy, complete with a list of men who would receive credit for Room 47's work and the families who would benefit. My God, Mark whispered. It's all here. Everything you said. The final image was a photograph of the Room 47 team, similar to the one I had, but with an official military photographer's stamp and identification key listing all 8 members, including Catherine Bell, team leader, and Margaret Winters, radio intercept specialist. Undeniable proof, Evelyn said, her voice hushed with awe. This establishes without question that Catherine Bell led this team, that their work was crucial to Allied victories, and that Sullivan deliberately reassigned credit after the war. And that documentation exists proving it all, Caroline added, her expression a mixture of shock and admiration. Evelyn carefully rewound the film and returned it to its container. We need to get this to the archives immediately, where it can be properly preserved and secured. With this evidence and your grandfather's materials, we have everything we need to correct the historical record. What about Sullivan's grandson? Mark asked. And the other families? Won't they try to prevent this from becoming public? They might try, Evelyn acknowledged. But once materials are formally accessioned by the National Archives as historical documents, they fall under federal protection. Tampering with them would be a serious crime. As we prepared to leave, Diane securing the film canister in an archival box, I felt an overwhelming sense of completion. My grandfather had protected this truth for decades, passing the burden to my father, who had passed it to me. Now, finally, the secret would emerge from the shadows. Outside the gallery, Mark insisted on driving us to the archives himself, unwilling to let the microfilm travel without protection. I underestimated you, Mom, he said as we pulled away from the curb. We both did. Caroline nodded in agreement from the back seat. You saw me as just an old woman clinging to a house, I replied without bitterness. I understand why. I didn't know the importance of what I was protecting either until now. At the archives, Evelyn led us through security to a special collections room where our arrival was expected. The director himself greeted us, his expression solemn as Evelyn explained what we'd found. Dr. Miller has briefed me on the preliminary findings, he said. If authenticated, this would represent a significant historical correction. I've already assigned a security detail to the Reed Warren collection. What happens now? Caroline asked. We'll digitize everything immediately and create secure backups, the director explained. Then our historians will analyze the materials, cross-reference with existing records, and prepare a comprehensive report. He looked at me directly. Mrs. Harrington, your family has done this country a great service by preserving these records. As we completed the paperwork transferring custody of the microfilm to the archives, I noticed Mark step aside to make a phone call. When he returned, his expression was grim. That was my contact at the police department, he said quietly. 2 men in suits were seen examining the exterior of Mom's house about 20 minutes ago. They left when the patrol car approached. Blake, I murmured. He's not giving up. We need to address this directly, Evelyn said. Now that we have the complete evidence secure, perhaps it's time to make a strategic move. What do you suggest? I asked. A preemptive disclosure, she replied. I have contacts at several major news outlets. We could provide a preliminary report of our findings, enough to establish public interest without compromising the ongoing research. Once the story is public, Mark mused, it becomes much harder for anyone to suppress it. Or to threaten those who discovered it, Caroline added, giving me a concerned look. I considered the options. Going public would mean exposing the Sullivan, Peterson, and Galloway families to scrutiny and potential scandal. It would mean challenging powerful political interests. But it would also mean fulfilling my grandfather's mission, ensuring that Catherine Bell and the Room 47 team finally received the recognition they deserved. Let's do it, I decided. Catherine didn't hide this evidence for it to sit in another archive. She wanted the truth to be known. Evelyn nodded. I'll make the calls. We'll need to prepare a statement, perhaps arrange an interview. As we left the archives, I felt lighter than I had in weeks. The burden of secrecy that had weighed on my family for 3 generations was lifting at last. Whatever happened next, the truth would no longer be buried in my attic, waiting to be discovered. In the car heading home, Caroline asked the question that had been circling in my mind as well. Mom, what about the house? Do you still want to keep it now that its secret is safe? I gazed out the window, watching the city pass by. The house served its purpose, I said finally. It protected the truth until the right time came to reveal it. Now, I turned to look at my children. Now, I think it's time for a new chapter. 3 days later, the world shifted beneath our feet. The Washington Post ran the headline, "Watu Code-Breaking Unit's Contributions Erased from History." The New York Times followed with, "The Ghosts of Room 47, How America's Most Brilliant Codebreakers Were Written Out of History." By noon, every major news outlet had picked up the story. I sat in my living room, surrounded by Mark and Caroline, watching as Evelyn Miller appeared on a national morning show, carefully explaining the evidence we'd discovered and its implications. "What we're seeing is an orchestrated effort after World War II to reassign credit for critical intelligence operations," she explained, her academic demeanor lending gravity to her words. Catherine Bell led a team that made breakthrough decryptions that directly influenced major Allied victories. After the war, a high-ranking intelligence official named Lawrence Sullivan deliberately obscured their contributions and reassigned credit to advance his own career and benefit certain well-connected families. And these families went on to significant political prominence? The host asked. That's correct. The Sullivan, Peterson, and Galloway families all built political dynasties partly on the reputations of men who were falsely credited with these intelligence coups. My phone hadn't stopped ringing since the story broke. Journalists, historians, documentary filmmakers, all wanting to speak with William Reed's granddaughter. Mark had taken over as my impromptu media coordinator, screening calls and deflecting the most intrusive requests. "CBS wants to do a feature interview," he announced, putting his hand over the receiver. "They're offering to send a car this afternoon." I shook my head. "Not today. I need to visit Margaret first. She should be part of this too." By mid-afternoon, the inevitable political fallout had begun. Congressman James Sullivan issued a terse statement, claiming no knowledge of his grandfather's actions and promising to cooperate with any historical investigation. Governor Peterson's office was reviewing the allegations. Senator Galloway's spokesperson dismissed the entire story as unsubstantiated historical revisionism. But the evidence was too compelling to dismiss. The National Archives had digitized the microfilm and released selected images that clearly showed Sullivan's Operation Legacy memo, creating a paper trail that couldn't be denied. When we arrived at Sunset Valley Nursing Home, Margaret Winters was sitting up in her wheelchair, more alert and animated than I'd ever seen her. A small television in her room was tuned to the news, where Catherine Bell's story was still unfolding. "Eleanor," she exclaimed when she saw me. "You did it! You actually did it!" I introduced Mark and Caroline, explaining how they'd helped protect the evidence despite initially doubting my story. "I knew William would find a way," Margaret said, her eyes shining. "He was always the most determined of all of us." "Not just William," I corrected gently. "Catherine, too." Her microfilm was exactly where she said it would be. Margaret's hand went to her throat, touching the scarf that covered her old scar. She was brilliant that way, always thinking ahead. She turned to Mark and Caroline. "Your great-grandfather loved her very much, you know. After she died, something in him just broke. That's why he ran, why he changed your name. It wasn't just about protecting the evidence. It was about starting over where her ghost wouldn't follow him." "We'd like you to tell your story too," Caroline said. "You're the last living member of Room 47. People should hear from you directly." Margaret considered this, then nodded slowly. "Yes, it's time. For Catherine. For all of us." She looked at me, her expression suddenly fierce. "And for that snake Sullivan and his ilk to finally face the music." That evening, a SWAT team arrested Thomas Blake at his apartment. The official charge was impersonating a federal officer, but the news reports mentioned his connections to a private security firm with long-standing contracts with the Sullivan family. 2 days later, evidence emerged that Blake had been monitoring my house on direct orders from Congressman Sullivan's chief of staff. The political avalanche had begun. Calls for investigations, for resignations, for full disclosure of family records grew louder each day. Historians and journalists dug deeper, uncovering other instances where the Sullivan, Peterson, and Galloway families had benefited from falsified achievements. A week after the story broke, Mark, Caroline, and I accompanied Margaret Winters to the National Archives for a formal ceremony. The director unveiled a new special exhibition, Room 47, America's Forgotten Heroes. Catherine Bell's photograph held the central position, with a detailed biography highlighting her mathematical genius and leadership. Beside it were displayed the photographs and stories of each team member, including Margaret herself. "Today, we correct a historical injustice," the director announced to the assembled press. "We acknowledge that Catherine Bell and her team made contributions to Allied victory that have gone unrecognized for 7 decades, and we reaffirm our commitment to historical truth, no matter how long buried." Margaret, resplendent in a new blue dress and her trademark scarf, addressed the crowd from her wheelchair. "We never sought glory," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "We did our duty, as did thousands of others. But when our work was stolen, when our colleagues were silenced, that was a betrayal of everything we fought for." She paused, composing herself. "Catherine Bell died because she wouldn't allow her work to be stolen. William Reed spent his life protecting the truth. Today, they are vindicated." As the ceremony concluded, I found myself standing before Catherine's photograph, studying the determined eyes of the woman who had loved my grandfather, who had changed the course of history, who had been erased until now. "Mrs. Harrington," a young reporter approached tentatively, "may I ask what you plan to do now? Will you keep your family home?" I glanced across the room, where Mark and Caroline were speaking with Evelyn about the detailed catalog she was preparing of the Room 47 materials. "The house has served its purpose," I replied. "My grandfather built it to protect a secret. Now that secret is out in the world where it belongs." "So you'll sell it?" I smiled. "Not exactly. My children and I have decided to donate it to a historical preservation trust. It will become the Reed Bell Historical Center, dedicated to uncovering and preserving overlooked contributions to American history, particularly those of women and minorities." The reporter's eyes widened. That's remarkable." "It's fitting," I corrected gently. "That house protected the truth for 60 years. Now it will help bring other buried truths to light." 2 days later, Congressman James Sullivan announced he would not seek re-election and was withdrawing from presidential consideration. His statement referenced a desire to fully investigate my family's historical legacy and make appropriate amends. Similar announcements followed from members of the Peterson and Galloway families as the foundations of their dynasties crumbled under historical scrutiny. As for me, I had found an unexpected new purpose. The donations that poured in for the Reed Bell Center were overwhelming, as were the stories that began emerging from people across the country whose family members had also had their contributions erased or minimized. Mark and Caroline looked at me differently now, not as an aging burden to be managed, but as someone with wisdom and purpose. They visited more frequently, helping to organize the center's development, introducing me to historians and archivists who could assist in its mission. One evening, as we sat on the porch of what would soon become the Reed Bell Center, Caroline asked the question that had been hovering between us. "Mom, are you happy with how this all turned out? Do you think Grandpa would be proud?" I looked out at the twilight settling over the neighborhood, thinking of the generations of my family who had carried this burden. "I think," I said slowly, "that Grandpa and Dad would be relieved. They protected the truth because they had to, but the weight of it isolated them. Catherine's story deserved to be told. Their story deserved to be told." I reached for Caroline's hand. "And yes, I'm happy. I found purpose where I thought I'd only find memories." And a pretty impressive way to keep us from selling your house," Mark added with a wry smile. I laughed, feeling lighter than I had in years. That too. Sometimes the most valuable inheritance isn't what it appears to be on the surface. As darkness fell, I thought about Catherine Bell, about her brilliance and courage, about the justice that had finally been served. Perhaps now, wherever they were, she and my grandfather could finally rest in peace, their truth at last revealed to the world. 6 months passed in a whirlwind of activity. The Reed Bell Historical Center was taking shape, with the attic transformed into a small museum displaying replicas of the Room 47 materials. The main floor housed research facilities and a library, specializing in overlooked historical contributions. I had moved into a comfortable cottage just 2 blocks away, close enough to remain involved with the center, but separate enough to have my own space. Contrary to my children's fears, I was thriving in my new independence. Margaret Winters had become a national sensation. At 94, she gave interviews with remarkable clarity, filling in details about Room 47 that weren't in the written records. Her story of surviving an assassination attempt had particularly captured public imagination. A major publisher had offered her a book deal, with a young historian helping to document her memories. One evening, as autumn painted the trees in fiery colors, I sat alone in my new living room, surrounded by the few personal items I'd kept. From the house, my mother's reading lamp, my father's favorite chair, and the photograph of the Room 47 team. I studied the faces in the image, now familiar from countless news stories and museum displays. Catherine Bell looked back at me with those determined eyes. I wondered what she would think of all this. Her name now known to millions, her achievements finally recognized, her brilliance no longer buried in archives and family secrets. Would she be satisfied? Or would she, like me, feel the bittersweet ache of justice that came too late for those who deserved to see it? I realized that in seeking Catherine's vindication, I had found something unexpected. My own voice. For decades I had been a daughter, a wife, a mother, defined by my relationships to others. Now, in my late 60s, I had become something entirely new. A keeper of history, a revealer of truth, a woman with a mission that was uniquely my own. The phone rang, breaking my reverie. It was Caroline. "Mom, have you seen the news? The Smithsonian wants to create a permanent exhibition about Room 47. They're asking if we'll loan some of the materials from the center." "That's wonderful," I replied, genuinely pleased. Catherine's story belongs in the national narrative. "There's more," Caroline continued, excitement evident in her voice. "They want to include a section about how the truth was preserved, about Grandpa, about Dad, about you. They're calling it the Legacy Keepers." I felt tears spring to my eyes. My father and grandfather had carried this burden in silence, never seeking recognition, only protecting what mattered. Now they too would be remembered. "Mom, are you there?" "Yes," I said, wiping away a tear. "Yes, I think they would approve." As I hung up the phone, I caught my reflection in the window glass. Not a burden to be managed or a problem to be solved, but a woman who had found her purpose in the winter of her life. I hardly recognized myself, and yet I had never felt more authentically who I was meant to be. 1 year to the day after we discovered Catherine's microfilm, I stood on a stage at the National Archives beside Margaret Winters. We were there for the official opening of the traveling exhibition, Invisible Heroes, Recovering America's Forgotten History, inspired by the Room 47 revelations. Margaret, now 95, sat regally in her wheelchair, a Medal of Freedom newly pinned to her lapel, belated recognition for her service. The ceremony had been attended by the president himself, who spoke eloquently about the importance of historical truth. As I looked out over the crowd, I spotted Mark and Caroline in the front row, pride evident in their faces. Beside them sat Evelyn Miller, whose meticulous research had helped transform a family secret into a national reckoning. When it was my turn to speak, I approached the microphone with a calm I wouldn't have possessed a year earlier. My grandfather, William Reed, protected a truth that was nearly erased from history, I began. He didn't do it for recognition or reward. He did it because truth matters, because Catherine Bell's brilliant mind deserved to be remembered, because history belongs to all of us, not just those with the power to write it. I gestured to the exhibition behind me, where Catherine's story was prominently displayed alongside other recovered histories. The Black mathematicians who calculated spacecraft trajectories, the Native American code talkers whose languages helped win the war, the female spies who operated behind enemy lines. This is more than a historical correction, I continued. It's an invitation to all of us. What truths are we failing to see? Whose contributions are we overlooking? What stories wait to be discovered in our own families, our own communities? I returned to my seat beside Margaret. She reached over and squeezed my hand. "We did it, Eleanor," she whispered. "For all of them." Later that evening, at a small reception in the Reed Bell Center, I watched as visitors moved through the rooms that had once hidden history and now revealed it. My children circulated among the guests, explaining exhibits, sharing anecdotes about their grandfather and great-grandfather. A young woman approached me, notebook in hand. "Mrs. Harrington, I'm doing a thesis on women in intelligence operations. Your work uncovering Catherine Bell's story inspired me to pursue this field. Do you have any advice?" I smiled, thinking of how far I'd come from the woman whose children had once seen only a burden. "Look beneath the surface," I told her. Sometimes what seems insignificant, an old house, a forgotten trunk, a woman deemed unimportant, can change everything. And remember, it's never too late to find your purpose. As the evening ended and the last guests departed, I stood alone in what had once been my father's room, gazing up at the attic door, no longer a portal to secrets, but an entrance to truth. Some inheritances come with deeds and titles. Others arrive as burdens we don't understand until we've carried them long enough. But the most valuable legacies are those that transform us in the carrying, that reveal not just the stories of those who came before, but the strength we never knew we possessed. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.